Hello, and welcome to Poetry at the Dalí. This is our July program. We're so happy to have you with us, even though it's remote. Tonight, we welcome three poets, Lynne Knight, Mary Jane Ryals, and Geoffrey Brock. As is our custom, we will begin with a reading by the Poet Laureate of St. Petersburg, Helen Pruitt Wallace. Helen has curated this program for us, and we so appreciate her involvement, and we appreciate our tradition of having one poem read by her. We have sponsorship from the city of St. Petersburg, for which we're appreciative, and we return sometimes to this concept that the great poet William Carlos Williams suggested to us, that it is difficult to get the news from poetry, but good men and women die every day from the lack thereof. So we're happy to hear the news tonight, beginning with Helen Pruitt Wallace. Please welcome our Poet Laureate, Helen Pruitt Wallace.
Thanks so much, Hank, and thanks to all of you for joining us for the Dalí Poetry Series. We're so happy tonight to have three terrific poets. We have Mary Jane Ryals, Lynne Knight, and also Geoffrey Brock. So, and I'm especially excited about this because these are friends from my grad school days at Florida State, and terrific poets all. So look forward to hearing them read their poems, and I know you guys will enjoy them too. I want to do a shout out before we get going to, first of all, to the museum, who's been so supportive of this poetry series. Thanks to all of you. And lots of staff work goes into this, and we appreciate it so much. Rachel and John especially, and always Hank, Dr. Hank Hines. And I also want to do a shout out to the city. Thank you to the city of St. Petersburg for supporting our program. I'm hoping those of you who are watching stayed safe during the storm. I will start by reading one short poem, as Hank requests, and it is about the storm. So it's called Hurricane Deliverance, this time for Elsa. An egret lacerates the sky, its wings daubing a wound, the wind unstitches. We with our sandbags, flashlights, duct tape to patch a torn world. Deliverance is a roll of the dice. Will the bay's mongrel song howl again? Will the tide recede toward the Gulf? Inlets, mangroves abandoned, leaving only sand, sun-slick and porous, reaching like the back of a hand. Toward what? Our muck of desires, our slights, our barnacled fears. Bargaining won't work, just luck. Who doesn't know an undertow of dread, the night air hissing their name? Will it swerve like a cosmic game, leaving its card at the door? The one we covered in plywood, shaking that sand from our hair. Okay, now let's get to the main attractions. Okay, I want to start by introducing Mary Jane Ryals. Mary Jane is the Poet Laureate of the Big Bend of Florida and teaches for Florida State University's international programs in the summers in Spain, Great Britain, and Italy. And I think you're just back from Italy, if I recall, Mary Jane. She won a Florida Book Award for her novel Cookie and Me, as well as the Yellow Jacket Press Chapbook Contest for Florida poets with music in Arabic. She's published 5 other books in poetry. Wow, I've been busy. And fiction. And fiction, along with several chapbooks. Mary Jane, it is so good to see you again. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you two too. It's been too long. Read 5 poems, and then Lynn's going to read, and then we'll come back together and read 1 poem together. I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. So my sense of the world is more an old Florida and rural kind of place that it was. And Tallahassee had a population of about 35,000 when I was growing up. And even at the age of 5, I was out wandering in the woods. So now I live out in the woods on a dirt road. And I call it the suburban dirt road neighborhood. But Lynn says, no, you live in the woods. So this poem is about that. And it's set during COVID. I have several poems that are set during COVID. Crossing the dirt road. Language fell around me, and though it is a song, a treat like Mexican mole and tequila, the child in me wanted to pitch a tent, climb inside and whisper, or to eat Vienna sausages from a can, like my friend and I did 40 years ago across town. So I walked outside my home and crossed the dirt road, took the path into the woods and sat in dry leaves beside the remnant pond. The sky navy with a streak of pink cumulus. Over the pond, the neighbors, 6 of them, laughing on the deck. To the right, the trickle of 60s blues and the guys growling jokes. To the left, the couple, a murmur, a babble, a jumble of distorted voices, celebrating what they could during COVID times. Voices sliding in circles over the water and then lifting out. The moon was rising a little over half, and those voices, little by little, faded, and only a few remained. Then were gone like the lake was a brain that had finally gone to sleep. The stars took off their disguises and winked as the tree frogs started with their chirping. Then cicadas added their shish shish, and the bullfrogs called in bass, all of them beginning their enduring and steady song. The next poem is also set at the same spot across the street, but in daylight this time, and again under the COVID fears. I don't know if you all know the sweet gum, but it's got a nasty little seed pod that falls to the ground. And if you're barefooted and it gets you, it hurts because it's a circular thing. It looks just like COVID. Sweet gum ball. Spring will not be still, filled with the honk of swamp birds, of birds kiting air. Dewberries by the pond, plump and ripen, red to black. Black butterflies sip on tiny bouquets of orange lantana. I hold up a sweet gum ball from its tree. It's shaped like coronavirus, yet its seeds feed birds and squirrels, and its green seed tea is antiviral. Like it or not, we all step on wildflowers, all fall into just woven spider webs, all smell fistfuls of jasmine too. And I want this small strength inside the sweet gum ball to be enough. Now we're going to go to Italy for a long train trip, a long, somewhat torturous train trip down to Naples. And Jeff, please forgive me if I really screw up the Italian. It's pretty bad, but you know, that's my third language of none of them very good. Okay, this was a poem that I wrote when we went to Sorrento, which is just south of Naples and just north of the Amalfi Coast. The Amalfi Coast is kind of too touristy now, but Sorrento is still pretty authentic, and it was a lovely trip. I went with my husband, Michael Trammell, and we witnessed 2 robberies while we were in the train station and 2 attempts to pickpocket or somehow get money from us. So this is the poem regarding that. Train from Sorrento to Napoli. The muse is an overachieving pain in the ass today on a train with no AC. Yes, she displays oranges on trees and hot red bougainvillea, but inside the old train brewing us, two men play accordion and a tambourine, and it bounces across the metal sides. Across from me, Michael apologizes for choosing this earlier train, and a huge man sits next to me, smelling of tennis shoe sweat. The muse put musical notes on her mask, Michael explains. We pass piano y meta y vico y quanche. The muse has trapped me in the seat, but through mountain tunnels, cool darkness, quiet. The Italian man's left elbow juts over 1 inch from my right breast, and Michael explains proxemics, as if knowing the word for chill out, he's Italian, less body space, makes much difference. Outside, pines and firs lean away from the train, and laundry hangs from high buildings with terracotta roofs and plaster chipped off the sides. Poor Napoli suburbs, the loud and sometimes more tender part of Italy, where the people were sold industrialization that only gouged a hole in the whole. No amo vita, I don't love life, the wall graffiti says. This is not Florence. Briars and motorcycles, construction, the sea, the mountains, somewhere nearby, Pompeii, the furnace, I don't want to be a gazer into. Pia piano, umbrella pines, ads for diamond rings, trash stirred up with white moon flowers. Atop a soot-covered building, a terrace, bougainvillea, and vines running across the top. The muse has not given up on beauty here. Another building with succulents on the roof, a car graveyard below. The muse wants my ankles sweating as we chug past Vesuvius' giant silhouette. The sea, where we all become fluid, the same, where even here a mountain can cough, spit, turn us all to hot ash. Oh, crawling with myth and bad information, there's still elegance and beauty. Oh, muse, you dirty realist, you push us to make all these totems, these fickle gods, these ruined palaces. Ah, muse, after all, you are a tribute to wonder. Italy and all of us are so many things. The next poem I'm going to read is called Florence After Lockdown 2021. This year in Florence, 80% of the people were not yet vaccinated, and we wore masks everywhere. All of us, and the Italians did too, and did a great job of it. But it was a pretty tiring, and our fellow faculty members took us to the Duomo for a Sunday mass, which I had never done. One of the faculty members is a music professor, so he had connections to the organist. So I was really grateful to them for taking us there. And it took me back, even to little old Tallahassee and the Presbyterian Church, but even more. And it's really all about sound with this poem, I think. Florence After Lockdown 2021. For Greg, Jonathan, and Michael. On the bones of my ears, I hear chatter all day and all night. The chatter of Saturday City, the bust out from lockdown for months. The echo of Santa Croce Piazza, of dog bark, of horse clip-clop, of dishes clattering, church bells clanging, the double door slam of Palazzo Entrada. In the alleys, songs of North Africans calling to God, that release of pain. Our neighbors who live here say during COVID, Firenze was so quiet that the foxes and porcupines walked the abandoned streets. On Sunday in the Duomo, the pipe organ blasts bass, vibrates through us like lions, the priest's voice a rasping tenor, tender surprise. The solo by the alto reminds my ears of water and wavy glass in a beach house at sunrise. Where are you? Where is your sound when you were thinking? For me, the purple flowers in pots at La Vespe Ristorante sing the soprano of the choir women, slow vibrato rising as incense up and up. These old choir songs take me to Appalachian Americana songs 700 years later, only with guitars and banjos, their major and minor weaving like Penelope's silk gowns. This wistful prayer, yes, that same release of pain. And one more for a girlfriend of mine who lives in Florence. And I call it an obad because I wanted to do it sort of that way. But obads are for mornings, and we were there in the afternoon, and it is also for lovers, but I love to break rules. So this poem is for Laura, who is a staffer on the program, doesn't get a lot of time off. So when we see each other, it's very condensed and intense and wonderful. She's from the United States, but she's married and has children with a Sicilian man. When we're together, very brief periods. She with a young family, we make it important and we pack in a lot. So this is for Laura, and I hope she can listen. I hope she can listen or watch this. Afternoon obad for Laura. Oh, afternoon, dust and stones smell like wild irises, a child's mouth opening, hungry for the words to spill out, like the tiny macchiatos we sip. The cafe not full of keen new bar seats or trendy murals for the tourists, but a place honest as a Cuban Floridita, where a fan cools us and the tile shines a 1950s bird chatter and bee talk. You say children are just small people, and my buck teeth join open in ha ha ha, and your joyous lungs join in, reminding me without knowing it to take it this day, this speck of time with you. And you don't stop here in this rich and glorious Florence. We tease about my swampland home with a real crocodile, your son who lectures you about raised voices. You pushed me to see the Aeolian Islands, unknown, farther out, naming Levanzo, Favignano, and not stopping there, Maritimo or Pantelleria, far from our windows of laundry and impatience, with mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, thrown, as we know they will be, to the evening, beyond our arms, our hearts, our momentary migration together in this tempestuous sky. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MJ. That was terrific. It was a great
reading.
It's so good to hear your poems again. So I look forward to hearing more about them and how you've written what you're doing with your new work as well. And now
Same
I have
to you. Same to you with yours.
Thank you. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Carol Lynne Knight. Lynne is the co-director of Anhinga Press. And since 1992, she's edited and designed more than 150 literary publications for the press. That's a lot. You've been busy.
Yes.
She's the author of 2 books of poetry, A Fretted Terrain, Like Mars, published by Apalachee Press in 2020, and also Quantum Entanglement, Apalachee Press in 2010. Another, If I Go Missing, is forthcoming from Fernwood Press. So congratulations on that. Her poetry has appeared in Another Chicago Magazine, The Ledge, Slipstream, Comstock Review, Redactions, So to Speak, Rivet, and other publications. In other lives, she's worked as an art teacher, a potter, a videographer, a copy editor, and graphic designer. And she lives in Tallahassee, Florida. So welcome, Lynne. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Helen. I'm really happy to be here. I sent you my book before COVID, and we were talking about face-to-face greetings then, but I'm happy to be virtual, maybe virtuous this time around. The first poems I'm going to read are from A Fretted Terrain, Like Mars, which got lost in COVID somewhere. And they'll be for sale, I think, with your bookstore. So The first one is called Girlfriends Go to the Beach, and it's written from the viewpoint of me as a teenager and quite a bit younger. Girlfriends Go to the Beach. 1. When we go to the beach, the ride is the most fun. Sudden freedom away from the house, where my skin is always too small. Now the need to answer and comply is ground into asphalt. Here we go, hand out the window, air pushing against it as we speed. The snarl of wind rolling over my skin. I lift it. I lift my arm as if I can fly away. Look, I have grown feathers. 2. Radio music surrounding us, a sonic swirl, the air vibrating with heartbeat, the car rocking at the stoplight as we dance, bouncing like beach balls out of the car, then back in just before the light turns green. All of us landing upside down in the back seat, laughing and wriggling to be right side up, like bath toys bobbing to the surface. We defy gravity and traffic and keep dancing. 3. We are hot tamales on the ride home, red skin, pink skin, unburned handprint from sunscreen carelessly placed, still basking in freedom and sand, salty skin, stringy hair, lolling, not dancing, crooning, not rocking. Someone's head on my shoulder, soft breath, a curl of seaweed in her hair, wet towels on the seat, warm sodas passing around, windows down, an Irish lullaby sung slow enough to be off key. Green lights all the way, we're dragging back in that sweet, sassy way of almost sundown. Wafer of moon chasing us home. Further on in my life, I had a boyfriend who lived in Atlanta and I lived in Tallahassee. So we would meet in the little town of Cordele, which is little. Meet me in Cordele. The Chinese restaurant is mediocre, but good for hunger and foreplay. Eyes over lo mein, hands like shadow puppets, playing on the red dragon in the window. Fortune cookies that promise your conquest and success. Meet me in Cordele. The interstate will whine in the parking lot, muffling our first few minutes of awkward conversation. Happy hour traffic on Friday night in Tifton slowed to a stutter. I-75, a crazed blur of rain and condensation, like our skin last time. Slick, bright, bluish with TV flicker. There will be nothing there but me. No distractions except the hotel television. Perhaps that lioness, her tongue grooming her mate as I gaze across the sheets. Meet me in Cordele. Meet me when you hunger, when the lions mate. Meet me halfway. And this about a place a little closer to your home, Helen. It's called At the Dutch Motel in Tampa. I'm sure it's a landmark place. At the Dutch Motel, with its tiny windmill, with its rough bathroom door stuck closed and shutting me out of our guest room until you pull it open, laughing. The bed, a tossed affair where we sleep, your so young body next to mine, my body so yearning for skin and abandon that I have driven 250 miles to find you again. These days, I am untamed, meaning lost in human terms, forsaken and seeking. You wake, your body so lovely in the half light. And that was written a few months after I got a divorce. So that's where I'm coming from on that one. Okay, this is kind of contemporary. And we all have health problems in my contemporary state. This was written a couple years ago. It's called Body Language 1. I have been talking to my body lately, questioning her decisions to blunder along in my veins like a runaway horse, tying muscles into intricate Celtic knots, waking me at 3 a.m., responding to changes in barometric pressure like a drunken rhino. If I say I couldn't live like that, my body, stubborn alien hiding in my vertebrae, says, yes, you can, and writes a serial drama that ends with me living like that. A foreigner, my body, a secret troll who only listens enough to plot against me, would just as soon prick my finger as throw a table leg into my shin. In my mind, I am an 18-year-old, but wiser than that careless co-ed, and deserve a body that matches. My body says it doesn't forget if I step off a curb into a vacuum. My body records the incident, plays it back on rainy days, visits the body shop where a sullen mechanic fashions little daggers to aim at targets etched on every joint. I ask my body to find pleasure, and she says she doesn't remember that, becomes almost deaf if I inquire about the reason for her rebellions. Come on, I say, get up and dance. From the book that Helen mentioned, If I Go Missing, this is one of the poems from that. Some of the poems in the book are, if I go missing, send a certain detective to find me. And this one is called Abandoned Car Park. It's from the French show Braque. And the main character is Eddie Kaplan, who is a police officer near the Rue de Bonaparte. And my French pronunciation is way worse than Mary Jane's Italian. Abandoned Car Park. Don't send Eddie Kaplan and his sad-eyed gang of Robin Hoods to find me. They have crossed the yellow line. Their sense of law, like rough gravel lost in a gutter on the Rue de Bonaparte. In their attempted rescues, I am more likely to be buried alive or ticking off my last minute in an abandoned car park, staring down at a suicide vest. If I examine that moment, its tiny flakes of forethought, littering the empty garage, a clock's ravaged hands, merciless and ticking above the greasy floor, there is no future, only now. Just 60 seconds before the explosion, only ticking, only now. No more cat fur or lingering breakfasts on the porch. No laced embraces. Your hands, no, your hands. No transatlantic flights or penthouse dinners. No pleasures soon lost. For them, a farewell. Launching our hearts into the stratosphere. 32 miles from yesterday, gasping. And this one is for my son. When he became a teenager, he grew about 6 inches in 1 year, and it was an amazing transformation. So this is from an examination of those feelings. On the occasion of your birth, for Rob. I did not know that your luminous skin would toughen, your face so like mine would change, would beard, the razor nicking you as you taught yourself to shave, the murmur of surprise, the sting of the styptic pencil. I did not know when you danced with Raggedy Ann that you would later lose yourself in heavy metal and the secret musings of Mazzy Star. Earbuds buzzing in the kitchen, head rocking as you loaded the dishwasher, dreaming of Jack Kerouac and Robert Pirsig. That you would compose a poem that made me weep its delicate beauty. That you would face the world without defense, with armor broken. That driving through mountain passes, you would love the rocks that rise above the somber clouds like fathers. That you would marry in a church in late September, shop for groceries, cook dinner after work, assemble a snowblower in your dank garage. I did not know that you would grow to be a man, choose to live in the mountains and drive on ice across this savage world. This one is called We Don't Know How to Swim. My ex-husband was a police officer, a road sergeant, and in 1982, South Florida changed with the Mariolito boat lift and the riots in Overtown. We don't know how to swim. A soldier, my husband, arrives for dinner every night, adds radio squawk to the cuisine. Violence sits down and prays for calm. I serve it with overbaked casserole. Look up and the ceiling undulates as we eat. Look down and our feet seem to float over the rug. We are not drowning, but we don't know how to swim. We've read about the unrest and chaos churning where he patrols. The Mariolitos camping in our high school stadium, crowding the stands we used to crowd, a different sea of humanity, more needy, more lost, and volatile. Riots change everything. There is burning, there is fear, there is despair dusted with ash, a NewsHour desperation at the dinner table. Now we are drowning. And my last one is a short one that follows Mary Jane's poem in our little chapbook, Wonderland 2020. It's called Slide Down. And she mentioned Lucifer in the poem. Lucifer is lurking, writing bluesy guitar riffs that tempt despair, with scales running on like downpour. Blue sky pulls slowly from our hearts, It's Ella sweet, soprano ringing, scat, asemic and yearning lullabies that slide down the neck of a guitar like honey, or a silky moan like Nina rent in two, singing the wild bass, the knocked over empty bucket blues. Oh, Lucifer, we can still sing. And now Mary Jane and I are going to read a poem, and we're going to slide into place so that both of us are on the screen. And are you that way? Okay. We're doing some table ballet here. That's that. And Mary Jane's going to introduce this poem because she's so much better than I am. We practiced that, didn't we?
Yeah, but she said, anyway. Okay, we wrote books together, chapbooks together, in which I would send her a message about Italy and she would send me a message about the States, what she was doing. And somehow we managed to link those things. Sometimes we didn't, and it was fun and funny, and you'll see some of that in here, I hope. We're going to step on each other's lines a little bit. So that's part of the poem. This one is called While You Are Sleeping. While you are sleeping, I write this by hand, the way Italian children learn to do, slow-handed, that way giving art to our letters. While you sleep, the honeysuckle outside insists itself in climbing the stairs, meeting me on the 2.5 flight down.
While I was sleeping, but I was awake for half the night, sore from my closet project now finished, a pile of clothes I will never wear again. I did not thank them a la Marie Kondo, but heaped them on the bed to deal with later, sad at their tiny little waists and ridiculous styles.
As you sleep, moms escort kids to school, and spring is cold and gray again today. While you slept, my son's grandmother died. I will find this out later and wish I were a griffin and could fly across the sea to hold him, knowing he's reliving his father's early death.
Awake beside the sleeping Lucky the cat, who must be dreaming, her soft sighs and snorts and delicate clicks. She will be waiting for me to wake up and feed her if I ever
While you
fall
slumbered,
asleep.
the fresco of Mary under glass and the wall down the street, surely warped by the flood of 1966, had dried and purple flowers placed under them. As you slept, the long-haired guy who sits outside his inner tube for bikes shop was sitting on his stool in the middle of the street. Maybe he owns the street.
Awake and a little flummoxed, I was writing about a Friday night teen dance when my character was suddenly manhandled in the middle of the dance floor. I had thought this would be fun and kind of silly, and now it is creepy and confusing. A 1960s #MeToo.
While you sleep, a bright-eyed Italian woman talks with enthusiasm to another on the sidewalk, her hands turned down like she is grasping, clawing. I know so little about the world. While you are sleeping.
And cold, so the AC turned up, and now hot, and now the alarm will go off in 20 minutes. So no sleep. I might as well turn on the lights. Lucky's signal to wine for breakfast. I have been writing in the dark on my iPad, something I never dreamed of as a fifth grader, writing my first poems in a careful cursive. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was really fun. And you've done that so well. Like I'm sure you've read it together many times, but I really like the interplay of your voices and sounds, and you've woven it together so smoothly. So I want to learn more about that. And I wonder how many poems you have that you've created together that way. So I look forward to chatting with you about that. And Lynne, thank you for reading your good poems. Really enjoyed hearing them, and also love your titles. I was thinking about your titles earlier when I was looking at your introduction. So yeah, terrific readings for both of you. We have another wonderful poet. We have Jeff Brock joining us, and let me take a second to say again, we're brought together not just because of Tallahassee, but because of Jeff's father, Van Brock, and all of us had the good fortune of working with him as poets in the grad program at FSU, and then obviously with Jeff. I really I hope you'll talk a little bit about your dad as you read your terrific poems, but we'll get into more of that during our Q&A, I'm sure. But it's, as Mary Jane mentioned earlier, it's really hard to even get us all together and not be thinking the whole time too about your terrific father, and what a powerful poet and teacher he was. But right now we have Jeff, his son, and I'm sure was always very proud of you. Jeff is the author of 3 volumes of poetry. The first called Weighing Light, and that was published by the New Criterion Award for Poetry. His second book, Voices Bright Flags, won the Anthony Hecht Prize. And he's been, I hear your name mentioned along the lines of Philip Larkin, one of my favorite poets. And Jeff has a sort of elegance, sort of formal elegance to his writing that his father Van also had. He's also the editor of the FSG book of 20th century Italian poetry, and the translator of numerous books of poetry and prose from Italian. Most recently, Last Dream by Giovanni Pascoli, and Allegria by Giuseppe Ungaretti. I probably messed those up a bit. His awards include fellowships from the National Endowment for Arts, the Academy of American Poets, and the Guggenheim Foundation. He teaches in the MFA program in creative writing and translation at the University of Arkansas. Jeff, it's such a pleasure to have you join us, and look forward to hearing your poems. And I hope maybe you're going to read some of your translations as well, if you want. So welcome.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to see you and Lynn and Mary Jo. I haven't seen you guys in years and years, and it's lovely to be rounded up this way, if only virtually. I'm in Rhode Island at the moment, actually, so sort of traveling, and I'm doing this from a hotel room. So nice. One of the advantages of the virtual things is it can bring people together from places that they otherwise wouldn't be able to go. So anyway, thank you, and thanks to the Dalí Museum as well for hosting us. I haven't been there since the 80s, when actually some friends and I closed down a bar in Tallahassee one night, and we didn't want to go home, and so somebody had the idea to go to the Dalí Museum, and we drove all night and got there in the morning and went to, got some pancakes for breakfast or something, and waited for the museum to open, and then spent a few hours wandering around the museum. And that was a very memorable, sort of perhaps ill-advised road trip, but so it's nice to be there in spirit anyway. I am, because of who I'm reading with here, I did decide to read some of my recent poems about my father. He died 4 years ago, as you guys know, and I've written several poems about him in the recent years, and I'll just read a half dozen of these. The first one is called Gray Communion. And in a couple of the poems that I've written about him, I was interested that you said that the theme of the reading or of the current exhibit at the museum is self and other. And so these are, of course, seemed to me to fit that theme. They're sort of about this, relationship, conversations with my father in some way, posthumous conversations. And some of them, including the first couple that I'll read, incorporate some of his own language into my poems as one way of sort of having a kind of conversation on the page. This one is in 4 stanzas and 8-line stanzas. Each stanza includes a line of from one of his poems, although it's not indicated which line it is, so you won't be able to tell, I don't think. It's also based on some dreams that, the kind of dreams that you have after a person dies, where they visit you. Great Communion. I still have conversations with my father. Sometimes we're at the bottom of the ocean and he's distracted by the lack of air. It's hard to stay on topic when you're busy turning the water into oxygen or trying to. It's also hard down there to hear with any clarity. It's easy, if not quite fair, to blame it on the weather. Sometimes he's standing at a teller's window with me on his shoulders. Some egregious fault of hers has made him livid. He wants to close all his accounts. He says that he has many. There is no oxygen inside the vault, I whisper to him. What I mean is money. Wounded, he shrinks beneath me, says he knows, but says the teller looks like his ex-widow. Sometimes we're in his dirty living room watching the Spurs, speaking chiefly in stats. He moved to San Antonio for a woman who saved him for a year or so. I have here his Gray Communion document, which states, whoever eats this bread will live forever. I can't imagine a more awful omen. Naturally, she and God lost faith in him. He never spoke of it, but so I gather. Last night, we dined together by a lake. His breathing tubes kept slipping toward his mouth, hindering meal and colloquy alike. He tore them off and flung them toward the shore. After supper, we argued over stars, both of us smoking again, as in our youth. I still have conversations with my father. This next one is called a cento for my father. And as some of you will know, a cento is an old Roman form in which a new poem is made by sort of collage-like, by taking lines from other poems and combining them to form a new text. The original centos were made by taking lines from Virgil and combining them in new ways to make a new poem. So these are all this is a 42-line poem so all 42 lines are from my dad's work, spanning 50 years of poems. Mostly his own poems. The last line is actually from one of his translations. It's a translation of a poem, an Italian poem by Franco Fortini about Fortini's father. A Cento for My Father in memory of Van K. Brock, 1932 to 2017. I learned to translate where snowmen tame wild country. They'll stand all night in snow. I heard them singing. I try to think of you and think of these, singing our Father, voices older than speech, whispering our gospels and histories, translating us again into transparent tongues. I can teach you how to translate. Begin bearing your son in your arms, our sons to us, our congealed bodies waiting without a tongue. You who leave us tongueless with one eye, I try to think of you and think of these. Without a tongue, I had no way to translate. None of us had fathers who knew that trick. Instead, I listen, my whole body a tongue. As I learn infinitives, idioms, the grammar, I mold desire into sentences like maned sheaves to show us what your words had always meant. I try to think of you and think of these. I tried to say, the horror is all yours, in its language of pure opacity, pait, 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 like your tongue breathing as quickly as you breathe. But I cannot clearly remember you. I listened for a dissonant singer in old oaks. From a ravenous cavity, the voices of rasping tongues. Branches increase the acorn. I'll try to translate the country of my origin to our sons. There are things I fear. Translation, for example, evidence, lost tongues, the disease of birth. I try to think of you and think of these. The terror is the getting lost in earth. Your son still trembles from your trembling. The new snow on the ground is very pure, translating us again into transparent tongues. Now what you don't say, I must say for you. Several of these poems are also sort of conversations between self and other in another way, where several of them sort of are in conversation with other poems or other poets. This one, for example, that I'm about to read, called Midwinter Letter, takes its form and its epistolary mode from a poem by Hayden Carruth called Midsummer Letter. And couple of the next poems that I read also take their form and sort of general approach from other poems, as I will mention when I get to those. This one's called Midwinter Letter, and it was written in the wake of the 2016 election, and which was followed shortly a few months later by my dad's death in early 2017. And it's addressed to my children. So, Midwinter Letter. Dear son of mine, dear daughter, the forecast called for a fine evening, and we did laugh at first, but then we bawled. Our wine turned into water. Portentously, even the moon was torn that night by schism, half dark, half bright, but I, blinded by rare optimism and drunk on common scorn, believed a lie, or more than one, and had the two of you believing too. I'm sorry. We didn't know what not to do. Our country had gone mad in a red flurry. It fell to my dying father to say something true, as if your mother and I had been relieved of duty, to steady us both, gather us in his eye, which was calm, and had seen assassinations, wars and genocides, lower and uppercase depressions, and most things in between, and which abides now, we must hope, in us. This is the way America works, he told your tearful mother as she lay her head on his shoulder, his voice cool but not cold. Detached, despite attachment, like the alien who briefs the counselors in that sci-fi poem he loved by Hayden. I like to think he was sent to these, our shores, from some counter-earth, obscured by a wreath of moons, and now has been recalled. And maybe even now he croons the fox or yellow bird to some space child, telling them tales till late of a world fraught with rage and bleeding and frenzy. Let's say that, It's a pretty thought, and as such, counterweight to current trends. I watched you near that end, sitting beside his throne-like hospice bed. Mira, you read him poems, a ride, a fish, a western wind. Ravi, you read also, but silently, to yourself, hidden in distant inscapes, afraid of being blown or caught or ridden. He murmured Innisfree, the be-loud glade buzzing in his mind's ear. Oh, paradox on paradox. Oh, little boats with your engines and your oarlocks. Oh, brilliant bilge. Much here is beautiful. Even the moon that night was 50-50. The talking heads droned on, their facts and faces all as shifty as sand or water or light when the good light's gone. I'm trying to glimpse a future where fathers are better and countries. All I see tonight are spacemen. If this letter should find you there, then picture a joyous me, not this large child grieving at 4 a.m. for his earthbound father, his failing country. No, not him. He is a ghost. You're living and must live further. The next poem is a sonnet, and it's sort of was inspired by one of Seamus Heaney's sonnets from his Clearances sequence, and it's based on a sculpture by a sculptor I think my fellow readers know quite well, Linda Hall in Tallahassee. She made a sculpture of an Anhinga and presented it to my dad. I think it was the 25th anniversary of Anhinga Press, some sort of celebration like that, in I think around 95 or so. And that now lives with me. And the Seamus Heaney poem was a sonnet about a family heirloom of his. And so so I decided to take that poem as a model for this one. It's called Totem. Hatched from the wet egg of a sculptor's eye a quarter century ago, it grips its squat stump, wings outstretched as if to dry. Its bones are wires, its plumage, ragged strips of pages torn from my father's books, drizzled with inky paint, barnacled with gimcracks, buttons and sequins, beads and hair, as if risen, drenched from lakes of metaphor and syntax. Call it tired Anhinga or hideous bird, and call it mine, a death gift from my father. I hid it with his ashes when I heard his voice begin to seep from every feather, slurring disjointed lines from his saddest poems, squawking of bodies changed into new forms. I'll read two more. This next one is brand new, actually, so I haven't read it before. We'll see how that goes. Always a questionable idea. This one is sort of takes its form from a strange early poem by Robert Lowell called Rebellion, a poem about his father. And so I just took the form of that poem, which is a weird 21-line poem with lines of different length and a strange rhyme scheme. Lowell's poem is called Rebellion. This one is called Betrayal. This was about a pact my father and I once made a long time ago when I was, I guess, in my 20s, a pact to quit smoking together. Betrayal. There was betrayal, Father, when you broke the pact we'd sealed one evening with 2 snuffed cigarettes, that neither of us would smoke again if the other didn't. But why am I left tonight, though 30 years have passed and death has stretchered you gasping for air away, dwelling again on that day, your voice, your breath, as you, lost in the rush of a fresh crush, tell me your latest news. The reek of you, a proof, I thought, of weakness, of love. I'd wanted you to save me, Father, by saving yourself, for us to save each other. That you couldn't or wouldn't was something I didn't want ever to have learned, a truth that burned down the long throat of my lives, back toward my birth, and forth toward future children, future wives. And the last one I will read is, it's the first time I've read all these together. It's kind of a lot. The last one I'll read is, for several years after he died, up until last year, he was still visible on Google Maps Street View, standing in front of his house. You know, when the Google car goes by to get those street views, he happened to be standing in his front yard. And for years, that image would come up anytime I looked at his old house. And so that's where this one comes from. It's called Street View, a visitation. He still drops in occasionally on my dreams with pointless scraps of news from the afterlife. So when the image of his old house loaded and there he stood, loitering like a ghost in the front yard, it wasn't a total shock. His back is turned, so Google hasn't had, I'm oddly grateful for this, to blur his face. He stands between his mailbox and a newly planted dogwood whose huge white flowers seem too big for its thin trunk. It's spring. The redbud is blooming too, and the oak is leafing out with that unspeakably bright chartreuse of April. His left hand rests on his hip. His right is clutching mail he must just have taken from the box. He's likely thinking of something quite mundane, lawn care, I'd guess, but somehow the tableau, he's dressed in white, his head is slightly bowed, puts me in mind of an aging, wingless Gabriel, reliving his famous scene, recalling his lines, perhaps, or the odd look on Mary's face. The photo, Google says, is 5 years old. He's 81, has 3 years left. If it's Friday, we'll all be joining him in an hour or two for pizza. He'll have cleared his sprawl of papers from the dining table to make room for us. There'll be a box of red wine on the counter, some glasses. On a warm spring day like this, I'll take the kids outside to play in his creek, catch minnows and crayfish till the pizza comes. If not, he'll likely come to our place soon. The world is never so much with us as when it's gone. I stare at the screen, fingers on trackpad, zooming and panning through the diorama. No matter the angle, my father's looking away. Now I become the car with its high-tech rig of cameras. I approach and slowly pass, and all the while the man stands facing the oak as if he had some news to tell it. Perhaps those letters in his hand or some top secret summons or message it's his job to deliver. And so he's Gabriel again, a messenger. White dogwood blooms instead of a lily stalk. The iconography clear, except he's old. He has no wings. There is no Mary here. It took 1 year for the cancer to do its job, a year in which I saw him almost daily. I like to think he had important things he could have told me had he chosen to, or was it up to me to ask some question? Instead of asking, I fenced his yard with cedar for his old dog. Instead of telling, he turned on the television so we could watch John Wick, The Spurs. So much time together, so little said about the things that matter. I haven't started going through his papers. Perhaps the important messages are there. It was as if his back, I think, had always been turned. With every click, I half expect the man on the screen to shift at last toward me, who longs to see his face, who dreads the smear.
Wow. I feel like Van is right here with us, from those powerful poems. That was terrific. Thank you so much, Jeff, for reading those. And each poem kind of took me back to, yet another session in his apartment doing workshops where he was, trying to teach us about prosody. I think your father was the first one who introduced me to that wonderful anthology, Strong Measures. And I know a couple of his poems are in there. And, what a terrific poet and teacher. So thank you so much for reading those particular poems. So
my pleasure. It seemed like a good context for that with people who knew him. So especially since there's no audience yet, so it's just you guys.
But he had a wide audience of many people, many students who loved him, and what a generous spirit he was always. So he took me under wing. When I started up there as a grad student, he was just so kind, and I didn't know anyone, and he let me into his workshops just as a part-time student, because I was going back and forth to St. Pete then. And anyway, he was really a terrific, wonderful man and poet. And I see a lot of him in you for sure. So at this point, we should all be unmuted, and we'll segue into our Q&A. And I think I want to start off with a question. I'm thinking a lot about how each of you have done a lot of editing work. Mary Jane, you have edited for Apalachee Quarterly a lot of fiction, but also poetry, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Lynne, gosh, your 150 projects, so much editing. And Jeff, your editing, and then also your translation work. So I'm interested if you all would think a little bit and talk a little bit about how the processes of editing, and Jeff, if you would include the process of translation, how those acts you think maybe have informed your own writing, the new work that you work on. What have you learned from your processes of editing and or translation? Anybody want to start?
Well, when I'm editing somebody else's work, I'm also thinking of their voice and trying to enhance it, not alter it. So that confuses me sometimes when I'm working on my own voice as to what I'm going to say. But I really do try to get some good grammar in there and make sure all of the popular things are spelled right. But that voice thing is my primary goal. And also whether I understand what they've said. If I don't, then I'll fight for it for a little while, that it needs to be rewritten so that the audience isn't confused. So that's a lot of words to have gone through, but here we are. 3 more books working.
Yeah, I think I'm a little more practical and a little more just mean. Okay, mean, because I look at a lot of entries and I have to cull them, and I have to find only the very best out of just a few, just a lot. And I would say that you better capture me on the first or second line or you're out. And that is even true for short stories, even more so true for short stories. I know that's brutal, but it's true. You've got to have your poem just edited before you even start, so that the editor wants to read your first line. And I've been made angry myself for people saying, that's not, you don't start there, you need to start here. But it's true.
Mm-hmm. So then does that mean that for your own work, you pay special attention to the beginnings of most of your poems and or stories, knowing that as an editor, that's what you zero in on first and foremost?
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We were talking about that this morning.
Yeah.
Going to get started on an interview,
Right?
Because she didn't have the first scene setting lines, and she was stuck for the whole thing until that information was there. So yes.
Yeah. I never thought about that, but I'm working on a project called Women Among Us, of women who are over 65 in Tallahassee and the area who've not gotten credit. They've just gone along very quietly and done great things in the world. And I'm doing the narratives for the photos that go with them in a project that's going up in Lemoyne Art Foundation in October. But I really cannot. I promised that, both stories yesterday for two different people, and I didn't know how many oak trees she had in her yard. So I couldn't go on until she told me, or at least I made it up, several trees, several oak trees. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important.
Yeah. Thank you. Jeff, how about you?
You mentioned translation. Most of my editing has to do with translation. The FSG anthology that I edited, certainly. I also founded a literary magazine at the University of Arkansas called the Arkansas International. So that has taken a lot of my editing energy in the past few years. And that publishes, that was inspired in part, certainly also by my dad's International Quarterly. It's a magazine that brings together American writers and international writers, many in translation. But I'm sort of asked a version of this question a lot since I've done so many translations, and people always want to know what the relation between the translating work and the writing work is. And I still don't have a pat answer. And in part because I don't really like to think about it or analyze it too much. I'm certain that the translation work does influence my own work in certain ways, but I don't like to sort of dwell on exactly how, for some reason. I think translation is the most intimate, sort of deepest form of reading is how I think of it, and so it's related to the question of how does our reading influence us as writers, and obviously it does. Obviously, it shapes us in almost every way as writers, right? What we read and what we choose to read and what we choose not to read, and what we read repeatedly and what we read quickly and then never think of again. And so translations, you're always reading it repeatedly and thinking about it, and you obviously you have to literally come to terms with every word. So it's got to influence you, and I'm sure it's influenced me. It does sometimes feel like when I'm translating an author that I'm taking a sort of private one-on-one writing workshop with that author, and because you have to figure out from the inside what the poem or the novel is doing and how it's doing it. And a lot of it for me also, like Lynne said, is a lot of it is about voice and getting the voice right. And it's, getting the meaning of the words right is a very sort of, it's a necessary thing, but it's a sort of elementary aspect of it. And the much more important thing is getting sort of tone and voice and rhythm and things like that. And if I'm translating prose, I think a lot about the shapes of sentences and getting the sentences to sort of have the right kind of rhythms and the right kind of snap, if they're kind of snappy and in the original, or if they're a long sentence, to have it be kind of elegant and kind of end in a, kind of to stick the landing, as it were, as a sentence. And then if it's a poem, I think a lot about the lines and having the lines have certain kinds of integrity. Obviously, it depends on what the original is and what it's doing and what its virtues are. And so my emphasis might change from project to project depending on what I'm translating. But it just makes me think about all those things in a kind of obsessive way that I think writers think about those things anyway. So I'm not sure exactly. Come back to my original answer. I'm not sure how it fits my writing.
Yes, Mary Jane.
I just wanted to bounce off of what Jeff said, particularly because when I'm abroad, either in Spain or in Italy, the language is not mine, but it's always coming into me, and I'm listening to it all, and I don't even know that I am, and I don't even think about it. I think I'm a better writer when I'm in those countries because I have to think a lot about language, and there's just something about the sounds in another country that influence you as well, like the poem about the clatter and the chatter and all that. I didn't even remember that I had heard all those things after, when I came back home after I had written the poem. I think a lot of it is subconscious. Our sense of editing. We edit for what we like, unfortunately. I mean, we read as editors for what we like.
I like how what you said, listening to all the sounds, you're absorbing it at the level of the body. It's a sort of visceral reaction to what's going on around you. And it reminds me of, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, Jeff, but I think I read a quote from you that said something to the effect of, when you're doing translation, you want to guard against thinking of the original text as needing to be basically true to being not a heart-lung machine. And to me, it is sort of connected to the idea of our taking in language and experiencing it, not just having it be an intellectual process, which I think I'm sort of hearing you say as well. What was that quote, Jeff? Could you remind me? I think I'm somewhere in there. But
I don't remember the exact thing, but in general, what I was saying is that a translation should sort of come to life on its own. It should live on its own. It should not should not require the original to be next to it on the page. I like the original next on the page, but you shouldn't have to rely on that for the life of the poem. And so in order for it to live on its own, it has to live through the sounds of English and so when you're as a translator, you have to also be a poet at the same time, because it has to, the translation, at least the kind of translation that I try to do, wants to be a poem in English as well. And so it is about listening but not about being slavish to what you're translating, but trying to serve it by not being slavish, by trying to think about what it's doing in the original and trying to let it do some of those things in English in a similar way or something.
No, I love that. It seems like everybody's sort of saying something similar, that the need to take the poem and again somehow to translate it, edit it, recreate it at the level of the body, so that our readers experience it rather than just hearing it and intellectualizing it. And I think that's so true with what we as poets are trying to do. I like that a lot. Which then lets me segue to another question I have, and I know it's going to be your answers, I'm assuming, will be pretty different, because I know Lynne and Mary Jane, you both have a sort of formal elegance to many of your poems, but I don't see a sort of strict structure or adherence to any particular forms. Whereas Jeff, I know that so many of your poems are playing around with form, and I love that too. Can you each talk about how you see form, whether it's in the traditional sense or whether it's a loosened, more intuitive process? Lynne, I think you've called your own writing a sort of informal, intuitive process. Could you both talk a little bit about how form, whether it's strict traditional form, and Jeff, clearly you write in a lot of free verse as well. Could you talk a little bit about that in your own poems? How do you make those decisions? Where do you see yourselves in that line? Jeff, you want to start with this one?
Sure. I mean, I'm sort of, I think in a way that I'm obsessed, even when I'm writing free verse, I feel like I'm obsessed with the form of the poem, just because those elements of sound are just crucially important to me in any poem, really, whether it's traditionally formal or not. And so free verse there are different ways of making, music in free verse, and traditional forms offer certain kinds of templates that you can either sort of faithfully adhere to, or that you can kind of blow up from the inside, or that you can bring some kind of variation on. I mean, I've written, a fair number of sonnets over the years, but I feel like every time I write a sonnet, I'm trying to do something different with the form of a sonnet, so that my sonnets don't feel like they're necessarily, based on the same, whatever template. And that's part of why I'm interested in, part of what I'm interested in other poets writing too, is trying to get a sense of how they conceive of form. And sometimes I'll, like with that Lowell poem, it's in such a strange form, that poem Betrayal, and I just kind of wanted to get inside of it by imitating the form and bringing entirely different sort of content into it. So I don't know. It's just something that no matter what I'm writing, I'm thinking of, and I think it's important actually to my brain to have some kind of formal thing that I'm thinking about, because there's a way in which the brain, but by engaging with those kinds of questions of rhythm or tone, or but by thinking about that, your brain is kind of distracted. A certain part of your brain is kind of distracted and freed up, I think. And there's all kinds of, writing and thinking about the role of constraints in art, constraints of any kind, whether they're traditional formal constraints or whether they're experimental constraints like the Oulipo avant-garde folks in France, or any kind of arbitrary constraint that you put on a poem, shapes the way that you write, and it gives a part of your brain something to do, while some other part of your brain is maybe unleashed or loosened up in some way.
Yeah.
That can feed the poem subconsciously, and having to look for a rhyme, for instance, you often end up with something. Ideally, you end up with something that you wouldn't have come up with otherwise, but then maybe better than what you would have come up with otherwise, or at least you can surprise yourself with what you come up with. And so even when I'm writing free verse, sometimes with free verse poems, I'll have certain arbitrary constraints in my head that maybe the reader won't have any idea about, and that will serve a similar kind of purpose. I don't know if I got your question at all, but
no, absolutely, yeah. That's a way of, in a rhymed poem, that sort of auditory template is lit up that takes you some surprising direction you might not have gone. I mean, I get that. I think that's so true. Yeah. Lynne, how about for you?
I'm if I have used a formal structure just to play around with it, usually I explode it when I actually get to the end of the process.
Okay.
And break up the lines. For me, the sounds that I'm working with make line lengths. And sometimes they're really, really skinny, and sometimes they go almost to the margins. But it's important to me how it looks on the page as a visual artist. Like if I'm editing a book and there's like 20 lines that are 20 characters, and then there's a 40 character line, it just hurts to look at it for me. And I want the poet to figure out some way to make it look pretty too.
So that's interesting though. So here's a question as a follow-up. Why do you not see that as that particular poet's way of exploding it at the end in the same way that you like to do with your poems?
Well, when I see that, it's a prompt to talk about it. And sometimes they explain to me why they've done it and it makes sense. And sometimes it was just lazy and we figure out another way to do it. But it certainly does prompt discussion.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So a deliberate explosion works, but that's good. I like that. Mary Jane, how about you?
Well, let's say thanks for the compliment about formal elegance. I love to write sestinas because that lit up thing happens to me. I try to find really, and then I can write whatever poem in that. And I kind of don't mess with that. I kind of like not messing with that particular form, probably because it's easier for me. But a lot like a sonnet, I cannot write a sonnet. Just can't. And I would say too that there's all kinds of internal rhyme that I like to do that I think creates rhythm. Rhyme can create rhythm, I think. And in the poem about Florence after lockdown, like a rasping tenor, tender surprise, the solo by the alto, and the ears of water and wavy glass, it just kind of, I don't know, it kind of all gushes out anyway. And I used to be a music major. And so there's a lot of that in there, that kind of trying to rhyme, but not rhyme at the end, just rhyme as I'm going along. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe that's sort of jazzy or something, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned internal rhyme. I think that's clearly so important in the whole sound work. And I sometimes like to play with internal rhyme as a way of offsetting the kind of slam door of a hard rhyme. It softens it. And I think I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. I mean, we could have a whole hour of just talking about the way music works in poems and all the different ways of whether you're writing a formal form or not. So those are all good answers. I think we're just going to have time for maybe one or two more questions. Could you talk each of you a little bit about your revision process? How do you know when the poem's finished? How do you go about your revision process? Many of the people who tune into our programs are writers themselves, poets themselves, and they might appreciate hearing how you guys go about it.
I usually type, these days I type on my iPad and I just type and type and type and type as images and words flow out. And then maybe of 4 pages of typing and typing, I start deleting and finding ways to connect what's left. And sometimes the most interesting part of the poem is when I'm developing the connections. So, and then the editing just keeps going until I try not to kill the poem with the editing. And the last line is important to me, maybe more important than the first line. I always want the reader to come away going, oh, yes, kind of feeling at the end. So that's what I'm going for with the editing, and developing things like internal rhyme, and trying to get the idea to be beautifully spoken instead of just the idea, that kind of thing.
Okay. Right. Jeff, how about you?
Again, I don't have a ready answer. I just, I revise fairly obsessively, but over the years, I've gotten better. I guess the revision period has shortened somewhat, and I now can get it to where it feels more or less done more quickly than I used to be able to. But it's just a listening to each individual poem and trying to make sure every single line is doing the work it needs to be doing. That it sounds right, that the voice is working, and also that it's conveying clearly to the reader what. One of the things I think a lot about during revision is what I'm trying is the, meaning is not the right word exactly, but somehow is what the poem wants to do. Is that going to come through clearly to the reader? And that's, speaking of self and other, that's one of the greatest, I think, self-other problems for any writer is sort of putting your imagining your way into some other consciousness that doesn't have your own personal knowledge of what you want to do, and try to read your own work through those detached eyes, and see, does it actually make any sense, or am I being completely cryptic and hermetic here? If I give this to somebody else, are they going to be able to get from it what I want them to get from it? And so it's a kind of metempsychosis of some kind, of sort of putting yourself into somebody else's, some absolute stranger's position, and trying to see your poem, at least briefly, through those eyes, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. And that's so tough. I know, so Peter Meinke, in his book, The Shape of Poetry, he talks about how in his revision process, he encourages all of his students to revise from sound, revise from the ear. I like that you said when I'm listening to the poem, he's encouraging us also, and I'm sure probably you all do this, and our students have, to create the poem, even to say it aloud as you're creating the poem, as well as when you're revising it. You're listening, which was the words that you used, but to create for sound. And he says even more so than to create for meaning, that he lets the ear guide him through his revision process, which is, I think, very, very interesting. Yeah. Mary Jane, how about you?
Okay, let's see. I just kind of fly through it, and and I mean, I write, it comes kind of out in a gush, and then go back and say, all right, what do I not need, and pull that out. All this comes from years of doing it and listening to other people say what doesn't work. And I think the last line is probably the most important, if you want to give an importance to something.
Yeah.
But when I'm editing, I sometimes don't even get to that last line because the first one isn't very good. But when I'm writing, I know that the most important thing is that ending. And I think you do get better over the years at like being tighter. I'll do the whole thing, and then I'll get to the end, and often it's not right, and I just let it go. I mean, I write a lot of goofy drafts, and then they're just sitting there on the computer. Usually they just never get. I never get there.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's because for me the last line is so important.
And I could give just a quick follow-up to sort of tie this question to the question about form. Sometimes if a poem is not working in a way that I can't I can't quite figure out if it's in a particular form, I'll kind of abandon that form and put it into either a different form or into free verse and rewrite it that way and see if that works. Or if it was started out in free verse and it doesn't seem to be working, I might change track and push it towards something more formal. And either of those two directions sort of can break things up and open the poem back up in a way that allows me to sort of refine my path to revision.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I love that. That's neat. And I'm thinking of Richard Hugo's book, The Triggering Town, where he talks about revision, and he says, you know, lots of times you're struggling with something, or our inclination is to look at a particular line when really the seed of the problem may happen a few lines before that. You know, and if you can get yourself to look a little bit ahead of where you think the problem is, you know, that can break it open as well. Yeah, but that's a great idea, Jeff, to play with that. Okay, one last question, and I think we're going to unfortunately have to close. Can you each talk a little bit about what you're working on now? Yeah, just let us know what you're working on now, and maybe also if you want to throw in the name of a poet that you might recommend that some of us may not be familiar with, that you'd recommend that we check out. I'd appreciate that. So, Jeff, start with you.
Oops, there we go, I was muted. I'm trying to finish a collection of poems called Great Communion, with the title that comes from that first poem I read. And there are a lot, you know, it's a number of the poems are poems about my father, but they're, and many of the poems are also poems that engage other poems or poets in various ways, either through imitation. I'm sort of trying to explore a sort of middle ground between original work and translation, which is sometimes called imitation, or there are various other terms for it. But I'm, you know, for my career, my translation work and my poetry have sort of generally proceeded sort of on parallel but very separate tracks, and I'm kind of trying to mash them together in certain ways, you know, by incorporating other people's language or by doing imitations of other poems, but making them my own in certain ways. So that's I guess the best quick description of this project that I hope is nearing completion. And I've also got a couple of translation projects on the go as usual, including poet Umberto Saba, who I've been working on for a long time, off and on, mostly off, but trying to make a push to finish that collection. He was an Italian modernist, and I've just loved his work for a long time.
Terrific, wonderful. Look forward to those. That's great. Mary Jane or Lynn?
Sure. Go. Oh. Okay, I want to recommend Amy Clampett, who was a 20th century poet who was just, her language was incredible, and she studied the Romantic poets a lot, and she was very intellectual, but she was also very much in her body, and she's kind of a 20th century Romantic poet. Let's see. I'm working on a novel right now set in Cedar Key, which is between us, you know, Cedar Key, Florida. But I also, I don't write very many good poems. So I'm just going to wait until I have enough to pull a collection together. And I don't even know what it would be about. Probably the work that Lynne pushes me. She pushes me to write more poetry, which is great. So some about travel, and I think a lot about giving voice to animals. I have a lot of that kind of stuff now.
Interesting. And
I think sometimes I verge on being an ecstatic poet, you know, like the nuns, but I don't quite get there.
Can I jump? Just want to jump for a second. What you said about giving voice to animals made me want to, because I also forgot to recommend a poet. But have you read Les Murray's translations from the natural world?
No,
that's a wonderful book in which he does that a lot. He gives voice to various things from the natural world, and it does so beautifully. He died a couple years ago, I guess. Another poet I would recommend is a contemporary British woman named Alice Oswald, who's wonderful. That's that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Lynne.
Well, the poet I would recommend is the one who had the most influence on me. She's not writing much lately, but it's Diane Wachowski. When I read her book, Medea the Sorceress, it just opened up my head to all kinds of things I could write about, not just the normal stuff that you hear about. So Diane Wachowski has like 20 books. My favorite is the sequence that starts with Diane, with her Medea the Sorceress and Jason the Argonaut, and are based somewhat on myth, but also quantum physics and letters and poems. And what I'm working on now is kind of Mary Jane's fault. She looked at some prose poems and said, this is like a novel. And so that was 2 years ago. And so now I have 3 coming of age novels that are sequences from 8th grade to the end of, or the beginning of 11th grade. And it's the main characters are best friends who are born about the same time and are growing up in South Florida in ticky-tacky houses in Hialeah that were all built for people to work at the airport. And so they grew up best friends, and then they face some tragedies together that takes them out of their frivolous lives. And there's a lot of talk about whether it's the truth or lying. Can we tell white lies? And of course, there's also teenage love, lots of teenage love.
I'm sure. Wow, 3, I'm impressed. That's awesome.
Well, they could be one huge novel, but I think it's a sequel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very cool.
According to Mary Jane, it's a sequel.
Seems to me like that.
That's terrific. Good.
And she's got World War II, the effects of World War II, and the Cuban Missile Crisis in the background too. So there's a lot of cool history in it as well.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to all of those. I want to. Well, first, let me thank you guys again for being part of the Dalí Poetry Series and joining us. And please, when you're in St. Pete, we're sorry that this has to be virtual right now, but when you're in St. Pete, do go to the museum as our guests. Please join us and visit there if you can. We would love to have you come by.
Wonderful. And the new museum is so gorgeous. Yeah.
So Jeff, it's not the same one you went to in 1980.
No.
The new one is beautiful.
I did not know that. Okay, we'll have to come back.
Yeah. And we have a new exhibit right now, Lee Miller, who is a wonderful photographer, and it's about women breaking boundaries. It sounds like an exhibit that, you guys should all see. I want to do a shout out too to Tombolo Books and Alsace Valentine. I hope that those of you who are watching, please order these great books by these poets. And Alsace stands ready to place the orders for you. And if you have not been to her bookstore in downtown St. Pete, please visit there because it's a terrific place. We're really lucky to have the bookstore. So again, Jeff, Mary Jane, and Lynne, thank you so much for being part of the Dalí Poetry Series, and thanks all of you all for tuning in. And we hope to see you back next month. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
Bye-bye.